Welcome back, dreamers. Tonight, we're exploring places where survival wasn't guaranteed, the most dangerous cities in the ancient world. These weren't just bustling marketplaces or ancient capitals. They were places where every shadow might hide a knife, every alley a secret, and every drink a trap. From brutal gladiator arenas to lawless ports crawling with thieves and spies, these cities tested the limits of human resilience and ambition. Before we begin, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world are you listening from tonight. Now, draw your cloak a little tighter. Keep your back to the wall and relax. Babylon was a city of incredible contrasts, a place where breathtaking wealth stood side by side with brutal cruelty. Its towering walls and magnificent temples reached toward the heavens, shining like gold beneath the sun, drawing travelers and traders from far and wide. Yet beneath this dazzling surface, the lives of ordinary people were often marked by fear and suffering. Babylon was ruled by laws that were strict, unyielding, and often merciless laws that ensured that justice, or at least punishment, was swift and severe. The famous Code of Hammurabi, carved into stone for all to see, proclaimed an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, a set of rules that left little room for mercy. In Babylon, even small crimes could mean death or harsh punishment. Stealing a neighbor's property, speaking disrespectfully to a judge, or failing to pay debts could all bring a sentence of brutal retribution. The law was not a shield for the weak, but a weapon used to maintain order and power. For many, the threat of punishment was a constant shadow, a reminder that life in the city was precarious and justice harsh. The streets themselves reflected this tense atmosphere, with narrow alleys filled with those willing to do anything to survive. Cutthroats, thieves, and spies prowled in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. Babylon's markets were vast and bustling, places of opportunity, but also of danger. Merchants shouted their wares in a cacophony of voices, while hidden hands exchanged secrets and deals that could change fortunes overnight. The city was a center of commerce, but also a place where power was fought for in whispers and conspiracies. The many spies who operated in Babylon gathered information not just for kings and officials, but for rival merchants and ambitious criminals. In a city so full of wealth, the temptation to betray, steal, or manipulate was always strong, and no one could be entirely trusted. The towering ziggurats, temples built to honor the gods, stood as reminders of divine power, but even these sacred places were not safe from human cruelty and fear. The priests who served there wielded great influence and could sway public opinion or the decisions of rulers. They were part of the city's complex social web, a web that intertwined religion, politics, and violence. Worship and sacrifice coexisted with treachery and oppression, creating a city alive with tension and unrest. Babylon was a city where the powerful lived in luxury and the poor struggled just to survive. The opulent palaces and grand houses of the elite cast long shadows over the crowded homes and hovels of the common people. Many lived in constant fear, not only of crime and violence, but also of the unpredictable will of rulers and officials who might punish them without cause. The city's grandeur came at a cost paid in human suffering, a cost that was invisible behind the shining walls, but felt deeply by those who walked the streets. Life in Babylon was unpredictable. Alliances were fragile and betrayals common. Families and neighbors turned against one another, driven by fear or the hope of favor from those in power. The city's complex social order was held together not just by law, but by a network of surveillance and control. Spies and informants were everywhere, reporting on discontent and rebellion before it could flare into open conflict. The city's rulers depended on this system to maintain their grip, knowing that a single uprising could unravel their carefully built kingdom. The question lingers. In a city of soaring towers and endless markets, how many lived in fear that tomorrow would bring only pain? The answer is found in the voices lost to history, those of the merchants who whispered secrets in dark corners, of the families torn apart by laws too harsh to endure, and of the countless souls who moved silently beneath Babylon's glittering surface, carrying their hopes and fears through streets where danger lurked at every turn. Babylon's story is a reminder that even the most magnificent cities have dark hearts. The glitter of gold and the splendor of architecture cannot mask the realities of power wielded without mercy. It was a place where wealth and cruelty walked hand in hand, where justice was swift and often brutal, and where the fate of many was determined not by chance, but by the harsh laws of survival. In the end, Babylon stands as a symbol of the ancient world's contradictions, a city that dazzled and terrified, that inspired awe and bred fear. Its legacy challenges us to look beyond the grandeur and ask difficult questions about justice, power, and humanity. It invites us to remember those who lived in the shadows of greatness, whose stories speak to the timeless struggle between hope and despair in the human experience. Rome was a city of immense power and grandeur, a sprawling empire's heart beating with the rhythms of politics, commerce, and conquest. Yet beneath its marble facades and gleaming temples lay an underworld where the strong devoured the weak and survival was a constant struggle. The streets of Rome were both a stage for spectacle and a battlefield where ordinary people faced dangers as deadly as any gladiatorial contest. The law itself often favored the rich and powerful, leaving the poor vulnerable to exploitation and violence. The gladiators who fought in the grand arenas were both heroes and victims, slaves and entertainers thrown into brutal battles that captivated the public. Their lives were short and harsh, marked by endless training, pain, and the ever-present threat of death. The blood spilled in the Colosseum was a grim reminder of the city's appetite for spectacle and control. Yet, for many Romans, the arena was also a grim metaphor for their own lives, where fate was uncertain and cruelty commonplace. Rome's laws reflected the stark divisions in its society. The wealthy elite enjoyed privileges and protections that the poor could only dream of. Punishments for crimes committed by the rich were often lenient, while the poor faced harsh penalties for even minor offenses. Walking the streets without permission, speaking out against authority, or failing to pay debts could lead to imprisonment, forced labor, or worse. the law was a tool used to maintain social order, but it was also a weapon wielded against those at the bottom of the social ladder. Emperors like Caligula and Nero epitomized the dangers of unchecked power within Rome. Their reigns were marked by excess, cruelty, and terror. Caligula's madness and cruelty became legend, with stories of him humiliating senators, executing rivals on a whim, and indulging in acts of debauchery that shook the city. Nero's rule saw the burning of Rome itself, a disaster some say he watched while singing, and the ruthless persecution of those he saw as threats. For the average Roman, these rulers' whims could mean sudden ruin, and fear of imperial wrath was a daily reality. The city streets were crowded and chaotic, filled with beggars, thieves, and those desperate for a chance at survival. Crime was rampant, and law enforcement was often corrupt or ineffective. Violence could erupt at any moment, from petty thefts to bloody brawls. The poor lived in cramped, unsanitary conditions, with little access to the resources that sustained the wealthy. Disease and hunger stalked the neighborhoods, turning daily life into a constant struggle. In a city of immense wealth, the divide between rich and poor was stark and brutal. Rome's social fabric was woven with tension and mistrust. Neighbors spied on neighbors, fearing betrayal or denunciation. The city's many slaves lived under the constant threat of punishment and abuse, their lives entirely at the mercy of their masters. Even those with some measure of freedom found themselves trapped in a system that favored the powerful and punished dissent. The promise of the Roman dream was often out of reach for most, replaced instead by a harsh reality where one wrong step could lead to disaster. Public spaces like the forums and baths were centers of both community and danger. They were places where politics, business, and gossip mixed freely, but they were also arenas for intrigue and violence. Political rivals plotted against each other, assassinations were not uncommon, and alliances shifted with alarming speed. The city's elite navigated these dangers with skill and ruthlessness, while the poor were left to fend for themselves in a world that showed little mercy. The question arises, in the heart of an empire, how many lived in the shadows, always one step from ruin? For every senator dining in a marble hall, there were countless others fighting for scraps, hiding from debt collectors, or fleeing violence. The grandeur of Rome was a spectacle that masked a society where danger and cruelty were everyday realities for many. The empire's strength was built not only on conquest, but on the subjugation of its own people, a truth often forgotten in tales of glory. Rome's story is a testament to the complexities of power and survival. It reminds us that beneath the surface of civilization lies a world where justice is uneven and where the vulnerable are often sacrificed for the ambitions of the few. The city's history challenges us to see beyond monuments and legends, to understand the human cost of empire and the fragility of those caught in its grip. In the end, Rome's underbelly is a mirror reflecting the timeless struggle between strength and weakness, order and chaos, privilege and poverty. It is a story of resilience and despair, of human ambition and suffering intertwined in the streets of a city that shaped the ancient world. The echoes of Rome's darker side still resonate today, urging us to remember that greatness often comes with a price paid in shadows and silence. Carthage was a city of contradiction and complexity, a bustling hub of trade and wealth nestled along the shores of the Mediterranean. Its grand harbors welcomed ships laden with spices, gold, and exotic goods from distant lands, promising prosperity and power. Yet beneath this veneer of wealth lay a darker reality, a city steeped in ruthless politics, ancient traditions of sacrifice, and a social order that protected the merchant elite while leaving the poor to struggle in the crowded, grimy docks. Carthage was a place where wealth and blood intertwined, where the glimmer of gold was often stained by the shadow of human suffering. One of the most chilling aspects of Carthaginian society was its practice of child sacrifice, a ritual believed to secure favor from the gods, especially Baal-Hamon, the chief deity of the city. In times of crisis, whether during war, famine, or disease, priests demanded the ultimate offering, the lives of children, often from noble families but sometimes from the desperate poor. These sacrifices were believed to appease the gods and ensure the city's survival, a terrifying testament to the lengths people would go to in hopes of divine intervention. The cries of those children and the mournful wails of their families echoed through the city, drowned out only by the relentless beat of drums during these grim ceremonies. While the elite enjoyed vast estates, luxurious lifestyles, and the protection of the law, the majority of Carthage's population lived in stark contrast. The poor inhabited crowded neighborhoods near the docks, where the stench of the harbor mixed with the smoke from cooking fires and the noise of endless labor. These workers, sailors, and craftsmen toiled long hours to maintain the city's economic engine, yet they remained on the margins of society. Access to food, clean water, and medical care was limited, and many lived under constant threat from hunger and disease. The city's laws favored the wealthy merchants and landowners, ensuring their power remained unchallenged, while the poor faced harsh penalties for the slightest misstep. Trade was the lifeblood of Carthage, but it was also a source of tension and inequality. The city's merchants controlled the flow of goods, wealth, and influence, using their power to dominate local politics and suppress dissent. Rivalries among merchant families could be deadly, as alliances shifted and betrayals unfolded behind closed doors. The docks were not just places of commerce, but arenas where conflicts erupted, where disputes over cargo or payment could lead to violence. In this world, trust was scarce, and survival often depended on cunning and strength. The city's religious life was deeply entwined with its political and social structures. Temples were not only centers of worship, but also places where power was negotiated and maintained. Priests wielded significant influence, acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people, but also as enforcers of social order. Their authority extended into the legal and political realms, where they could shape decisions and outcomes. The blend of religion and politics created an atmosphere where questioning the status quo was dangerous. and conformity was enforced through both spiritual and temporal means. The streets of Carthage were filled with a mixture of hope and despair. Markets bustled with activity as people bought and sold goods, shared news, and sought opportunities. Yet beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of fear and suspicion. The city's residents were aware of the sacrifices made in its name, the children lost, the poor ignored, and the quiet struggles hidden behind the facades of wealth and power. This tension was part of the city's fabric, woven into its history and its identity. The legacy of Carthage is one of grandeur shadowed by cruelty. It was a city that achieved greatness through trade and military might, but it also demanded a heavy price from its people. The image of Carthage as a wealthy and powerful city cannot be separated from the realities of its social inequalities and the brutal rituals that marked its culture. These contradictions make Carthage a compelling example of the complexities of ancient urban life, where prosperity and suffering existed side by side. The question that haunts Carthage's history is stark and unsettling. When a city feeds its gods with blood, what mercy is left for its people? This question invites reflection on the nature of power and sacrifice, on the costs of survival and success in a world where divine favor was sought through human lives. It reminds us that beneath the achievements of civilizations lie difficult choices and often painful realities. As we look back on Carthage, we see a city of both light and shadow, a place where the pursuit of wealth and security was inseparable from rituals of fear and control. Its story challenges us to consider the human impact of ancient power structures and the ways in which societies justify acts that would today be unimaginable. The echoes of Carthage's blood-stained history continue to resonate, offering lessons about the complexity of culture and the enduring struggles between wealth, power, and humanity. Carthage's tale is not just one of the past, but a mirror reflecting ongoing tensions in human societies between the privileged and the marginalized, between faith and morality, between survival and sacrifice. Understanding this city's history helps us grasp the intricate web of forces that shape civilizations, reminding us that every great city carries stories of both glory and pain. In the end, Carthage stands as a testament to the dual nature of human achievement, a city that dazzled with its wealth and influence, but was built upon foundations as fragile and painful as the sacrifices made in its name. It invites us to look deeper, to see beyond the surface, and to remember the lives caught in the shadows of history's grand narratives. Sparta was a city unlike any other in the ancient world, a place where the very fabric of society was woven from the threads of war and discipline. From the moment a Spartan child was born, their fate was decided by the state. Strength, obedience, and endurance were valued above all else, and the city's harsh customs reflected a relentless dedication to creating warriors. In Sparta, war was not just a profession, but a religion, a way of life that shaped every aspect of existence. This was a society where individual desires were subordinated to the needs of the state, and where survival meant embracing a brutal system designed to produce fighters who could endure any hardship. The agoge was the heart of Spartan life, a rigorous training system that began in childhood and continued well into adulthood. Boys were taken from their families at a young age to live in communal barracks, where they endured grueling physical challenges, starvation, and constant discipline. They were taught to fight, to steal without getting caught, and to endure pain without complaint. The agoge was not just about building soldiers, it was about forging a collective identity rooted in loyalty to Sparta and its ideals. Boys who failed were cast out, while those who succeeded became part of an elite warrior class, respected and feared throughout Greece. The harshness of the agoge reflected Sparta's deep commitment to war. Every aspect of life was focused on preparing for battle, from the simple meals served to the encouragement of theft as a means to develop cunning and resourcefulness. Stealing was not only tolerated but expected, as long as it was done without being caught, teaching lessons in stealth and survival. This paradoxical encouragement of thievery was part of a broader philosophy that valued cunning alongside brute strength. In Sparta, the ends often justified the means, and the city's laws were written in blood and discipline. Spartan society was structured around a rigid hierarchy, where the ruling class of warrior citizens held power over a large population of helots, enslaved people who worked the land and provided the economic foundation for the city. The helots lived under constant threat of violence and repression, their lives tightly controlled to prevent rebellion. The Spartans' fear of uprisings shaped much of their social and military policy, leading to a state built not only on external conquest, but also on internal domination. The tension between the warrior elite and the oppressed masses was a defining feature of Spartan life. Life in Sparta was marked by paradoxes. The city glorified strength and valor, but was also ruthless in its treatment of the weak and the vulnerable. Those who failed to meet Spartan standards were often abandoned or punished severely. The city's emphasis on collective discipline meant that individuality was suppressed and personal ambition was secondary to the needs of the polis. Yet beneath this rigid exterior, there were complex social dynamics and human stories of resilience and struggle. Spartan women, for instance, had more freedoms and responsibilities than in many other Greek city-states, managing estates and raising strong children who would become future warriors. Spartan laws and customs reflected a society obsessed with war and control. Public policy focused on maintaining the city's military readiness and social order. Any sign of weakness was discouraged, and conformity was enforced through strict social norms and legal codes. The city's leaders believed that only through discipline and shared sacrifice could Sparta survive in a world full of rival powers. This belief justified harsh measures and created a culture where fear and obedience were intertwined with honor and loyalty. The constant preparation for war meant that peace was often uneasy. Sparta's warriors were always ready to march, and the city's political decisions were driven by the need to maintain military strength. This militarization affected every aspect of life, from education to governance, shaping a society where conflict was not only expected but celebrated. Yet this focus on war came at a cost. The human toll was immense, and many Spartans bore scars, both physical and emotional, from a life spent in endless training and battle. The question arises, in a city built for war, who cared for the souls of the broken? Sparta's emphasis on strength left little room for vulnerability or compassion. Those who could not keep up were discarded, and emotional expression was often suppressed. The city's mythology and culture celebrated the ideal of the Stoic warrior, but this ideal masked the human suffering beneath. Families were separated, children were raised in harsh conditions, and the pressures to conform were relentless. Sparta's story is a stark reminder of the complexities of power and survival in the ancient world. It challenges modern notions of civilization and progress, showing that greatness can come with cruelty and sacrifice. The city's legacy is one of discipline and strength, but also of harshness and exclusion. It forces us to consider the costs of a society built entirely around war and control, and the ways in which such a system shapes human lives and values. The echoes of Sparta's militaristic culture continue to resonate, inspiring both admiration and caution. Its story is a powerful example of how a society's priorities shape its character and destiny. Sparta was not merely a city of warriors. It was a city of contradictions, where honor and cruelty, strength and suffering were intertwined in the daily lives of its people. In the end, Sparta stands as a testament to the extremes of human organization and ambition, a city where every law was written in blood and every life was measured by its utility to the state. Its history invites us to reflect on the meaning of strength and the price paid by those who live under the shadow of war. Jerusalem, during the reign of King Herod, was a city caught in the tension between sacred tradition and brutal politics. It was a place where faith and fear coexisted, where holy sites drew pilgrims from across the world, and where the shadow of violence loomed over every corner. Herod's rule was marked by grand architectural projects that transformed the city, including the expansion of the Second Temple, yet beneath this impressive facade lay a regime built on paranoia, betrayal, and ruthless control. The city was not only a spiritual center, but also a battleground of power struggles and secret intrigues. Herod's paranoia was legendary. He ruled with an iron fist, suspicious of those around him, including members of his own family. The stories of his cruelty are chilling. He executed his wife Mariam and two of his sons, fearing plots against his throne. His rule was defined by a relentless effort to maintain power, often through violent means. Secret police patrolled the streets, spies infiltrated the city's neighborhoods, and purges were common. No one was safe from the watchful eye of the king, and fear was a tool he wielded expertly to keep dissent at bay. The temple courts, normally places of worship and community gathering, became arenas of political intrigue. Herod's officials and priests operated a network of informants, monitoring not only the populace, but also rival factions and religious groups. The sacred space was filled with whispers of conspiracy and plots, making it a place where trust was scarce and alliances were fragile. The blending of religious authority and political surveillance created an environment where fear permeated even the most holy moments. Jerusalem's streets were a maze of tension and uncertainty. The city was home to diverse groups, including Jews, Romans, and other peoples, each with their own interests and loyalties. This diversity added to the complexity of governance and the challenges Herod faced in maintaining order. The city's population was often divided by religious and political lines, with various factions vying for influence. This fracturing made the work of spies and secret police even more crucial for the king, who relied on intelligence to anticipate threats and suppress rebellion. The economy of Jerusalem also reflected these tensions. Trade and pilgrimage brought wealth, but the benefits were unevenly distributed. While the elite enjoyed the fruits of prosperity, many lived in poverty and fear. Taxes were high, and the burden often fell on the common people, exacerbating social tensions. This economic disparity fueled resentment and made the city a powder keg of potential unrest. Herod's harsh methods sought to contain these forces, but they also deepened the divides within the population. Religion was both a source of strength and a point of contention. The Jewish faith provided a shared identity, yet interpretations and practices varied widely, leading to conflicts within the community. Herod's efforts to legitimize his rule through temple renovations were as much political as religious, aiming to win favor with the people and the priesthood. Yet many viewed him as a Roman puppet, an outsider whose reign was marked by cruelty rather than piety. This ambivalence added layers of complexity to life in Jerusalem, where faith and politics were inseparable. The secret police operated with a chilling efficiency, using torture, intimidation, and executions to root out opponents. Their presence was felt everywhere, from the narrow alleys to the bustling markets. Accusations of treason could lead to swift punishment, often with little evidence. The atmosphere of suspicion created a culture of silence and fear, where neighbors might betray neighbors and loyalty was a matter of survival. This constant surveillance was a defining feature of Herod's Jerusalem, shaping the daily lives of its inhabitants. Despite the repression, resistance simmered beneath the surface. Various groups, from zealots to religious sects, opposed Herod's rule and the Roman presence. These factions used clandestine means to organize, relying on secrecy and covert communication to avoid detection. Their struggles added another layer of danger and intrigue to the city, making Jerusalem a place of both spiritual significance and political volatility. The city was a crucible where competing visions of faith, power, and freedom clashed. Herod's legacy is one of grandeur and terror. His architectural achievements left a lasting mark on Jerusalem, but his reign was also marked by bloodshed and fear. The city he ruled was a place where faith was tested by violence, where the sacred was intertwined with the profane, and where the quest for power often overshadowed the search for peace. The streets of Jerusalem during his time tell a story of a city both holy and haunted, a place where no one dared to trust completely. the question remains, how does a city built on faith become a place where no one dares to trust? Jerusalem under Herod's rule offers a powerful example of how power, fear, and suspicion can transform even the most sacred places. It challenges us to consider the costs of political ambition and the fragility of trust in times of turmoil. The city's history during this period is a reminder that behind the grandeur of temples and palaces often lies a darker reality of control and conflict. In the end, Jerusalem during Herod's reign was a city of contradictions, a place where beauty and brutality coexisted, and where faith and fear walked hand in hand. Its story invites us to look beyond the monuments and scriptures to the human experiences shaped by power and survival. It is a tale of resilience and repression, of hope and despair, woven into the fabric of a city that remains central to human history and imagination. Tortuga, a small island off the northern coast of Hispaniola, was once a haven for those who lived outside the law. In the 17th century, it became a notorious pirate stronghold, a lawless paradise where freedom was promised, but often came with a price. Pirates from all corners of the world flocked to Tortuga, drawn by the chance to escape the rigid structures of society and carve out a life on their own terms. Yet beneath the wild celebrations and endless revelry lurked a harsh reality. Violence, betrayal, and survival ruled the island as much as any code or allegiance. Life in Tortuga was a constant gamble. The island was a melting pot of sailors, privateers, escaped slaves, and adventurers, all seeking fortune and freedom. But the freedom they found was rough and precarious. There was no formal law beyond the code that pirates themselves created, a set of rules designed to keep order among thieves and outlaws, but often enforced with brutal efficiency. The strongest and most ruthless ruled the island, while the weakest were at their mercy, sometimes tossed overboard or left to fend for themselves in the wild. Pirate justice on Tortuga was swift and unforgiving. Theft, betrayal, or cowardice were met with harsh punishment. A spilled drink in a tavern could escalate into a deadly knife fight, and disputes over loot often ended in bloodshed. The pirate code promised shares of treasure and a voice in decision-making, but these promises were fragile, easily broken when greed or fear took hold. Alliances were temporary and often dissolved in violence, making the island a place where trust was scarce and betrayal common. Despite the danger, Tortuga was a place of wild celebration. The nights were filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and the clinking of rum bottles. Taverns overflowed with pirates who drank heavily, told stories of their exploits, and plotted their next raids. The island's atmosphere was one of chaotic freedom, where rules were made to be broken, and survival depended on a sharp wit and a quicker sword. Yet beneath the surface of this revelry lay constant tension, a reminder that in a world without law, power was the only currency that mattered. The pirates of Tortuga were experts at navigating this precarious existence. They lived by their own codes of honor, which emphasized loyalty to the crew but also demanded ruthless efficiency. Mutiny was a real threat, and captains had to maintain control through a mix of fear, respect, and cunning. The bonds between crew members were often tested by the harsh realities of life at sea and the temptations of wealth and power. In this volatile environment, leadership was as dangerous as it was necessary. Tortuga was also a place where social norms were upended. The rigid hierarchies of the mainland had little meaning on the island, and people from different backgrounds mingled in a way that was rare for the time. Yet this apparent equality was fragile and often overshadowed by violence and competition. Women, though few, played important roles as tavern keepers, traders, or even pirates themselves, challenging traditional gender roles in a world defined by danger and opportunity. The island's strategic location made it a hub for pirate activity in the Caribbean. From Tortuga, pirates launched attacks on Spanish ships and settlements, disrupting trade and spreading fear along the coasts. Their knowledge of the seas, combined with their ruthless tactics, made them formidable opponents. Yet their success depended on the support and complicity of local inhabitants and corrupt officials who profited from their activities. This uneasy alliance between pirates and authorities added another layer of complexity to life on the island. The promise of freedom on Tortuga was always tempered by the reality of violence. Life was unpredictable, and fortunes could be made or lost overnight. The constant threat of naval patrols, rival pirates, and betrayal meant that no one could ever truly relax. The island was a place where dreams of escape and prosperity collided with the harsh truths of lawlessness and survival. Every day was a test of courage, loyalty, and luck. The question lingers, when there is no law but the blade, how does anyone sleep at night? Tortuga's answer lies in the resilience of its inhabitants, who embraced the chaos as part of their identity. They found ways to build communities amid the madness, creating bonds that could withstand the violence and uncertainty. Their stories are tales of defiance and desperation, of men and women who refused to be tamed by the world's rules and forged their own path, no matter the cost. Tortuga's legacy is a testament to the human desire for freedom and the lengths people will go to achieve it. It challenges romanticized notions of piracy by revealing the brutal realities beneath the myths. The island was both a refuge and a prison, a place of opportunity and peril. Its history invites us to reflect on the complexities of power, loyalty, and survival in a world without order. As we consider Tortuga, we see a society shaped by extremes, where joy and terror coexisted, and where every day was a battle for control. The island's story reminds us that freedom is not always what it seems, and that the price of lawlessness can be high. It offers a window into a world where the rules were rewritten in blood, and where the strongest ruled through fear and respect. In the end, Tortuga was more than just a pirate haven. It was a mirror of the human condition, reflecting our struggles for autonomy, security, and meaning in a chaotic world. Its story endures as a powerful example of how communities can form even in the most unlikely and dangerous places, and how the search for freedom often comes with a heavy toll. Alexandria was a city of wonders and contradictions, a jewel on the Mediterranean coast where ancient knowledge and ruthless power collided in a complex dance. Known far and wide for its famous library, the city was a beacon for scholars, philosophers, and seekers of wisdom. Yet beneath this intellectual brilliance lay a world where power struggles, violence, and fear shaped daily life. Alexandria was a city where the pursuit of knowledge often came at a steep price, and where those who questioned too much could find themselves silenced in the shadows. The great library of Alexandria was not just a repository of scrolls and manuscripts, it was a symbol of human curiosity and the quest to understand the world. Scholars from diverse cultures gathered there, sharing ideas and pushing the boundaries of science, philosophy, and art. This concentration of knowledge made Alexandria a cultural and intellectual hub, attracting thinkers whose works influenced generations to come. Yet the library's vast collection also made it a target, a place where political rivalries and power plays unfolded behind the scenes. Alexandria's rulers understood that control over knowledge was as crucial as control over armies and cities. The city was governed by powerful figures who used patronage and intimidation to maintain their grip. Scholars were often caught in the crossfire, their loyalty tested by the demands of political patrons who expected support or silence in return. Those who challenged the prevailing order or threatened established interests faced consequences that ranged from exile to death. The city's vibrant intellectual life was thus shadowed by the constant threat of repression. Riots and conflicts were not uncommon in Alexandria. The city's diverse population included Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, and many others, each with distinct identities and sometimes conflicting loyalties. These differences sometimes erupted into violence, turning neighborhoods into battlegrounds and forcing leaders to intervene with force. The library, as a center of ideas and debates, was occasionally caught in these upheavals, its halls turning from places of learning into fortresses. Scholars were silenced, books destroyed, and the quest for knowledge interrupted by the realities of power struggles. The role of philosophers and intellectuals in Alexandria was complex. They were revered for their wisdom but also vulnerable to manipulation. Some became pawns in political games used by rulers to legitimize their authority or to undermine rivals. The city's intellectual elite walked a fine line between influence and danger, navigating a world where ideas could inspire but also threaten. The tension between free inquiry and political control shaped much of Alexandria's cultural life, creating an environment both rich and fraught with risk. Alexandria's streets and markets were places of commerce and conversation, where ideas mingled with goods and gossip. The city was alive with the sounds of trade, debate, and the clash of cultures. Yet beneath this lively surface, intrigue and betrayal were never far away. Rulers employed spies and informants to monitor the populace and to suppress dissent. The quest for knowledge was intertwined with the quest for power, making the city a labyrinth of secrets and strategies. The destruction of parts of the library, whether by accidental fire or deliberate acts remains one of history's great tragedies. It symbolizes not only the loss of ancient knowledge, but also the fragility of human achievements in the face of violence and political turmoil. The library's fate serves as a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of culture and learning when confronted with the forces of fear and oppression. Despite these challenges, Alexandria continued to be a place where knowledge thrived, even if precariously. Its scholars made advances in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and literature that echoed far beyond the city's walls. The spirit of inquiry persisted, carried forward by those who risked much to preserve and expand human understanding. Alexandria's legacy is thus one of resilience, where the pursuit of wisdom endured amid conflict and uncertainty. The city's story raises important questions. In a place illuminated by knowledge, how many were forced to live in darkness? How many voices were silenced because their ideas challenged power? Alexandria's history reminds us that enlightenment is never guaranteed, and that the struggle between knowledge and control is as old as civilization itself. Alexandria stands as a testament to the power of ideas and the dangers they can provoke. It teaches us that knowledge can be both a source of strength and a threat to those who seek to dominate. The city's history invites reflection on the responsibilities that come with learning and the vigilance needed to protect intellectual freedom. As we look back on Alexandria, we see a city where light and shadow coexisted, where the thirst for knowledge was matched by the thirst for power. It challenges us to consider the price of progress and the importance of safeguarding the spaces where ideas can flourish. Alexandria's tale is a reminder that the pursuit of wisdom is often fraught with peril, but remains one of humanity's most enduring endeavors. In the end, Alexandria was more than just a city of scholars. It was a living example of how culture and politics intertwine, how knowledge can inspire and intimidate, and how the quest for understanding is inseparable from the realities of power. Its legacy encourages us to cherish and protect the fragile light of learning in our own time, lest it be extinguished by fear and violence. Pataliputra, the ancient capital of the Mauryan Empire in India, was a city of immense power and complexity. It was a place where grandeur met danger, where the splendor of palaces and temples contrasted sharply with the fears and uncertainties of its inhabitants. The city was not only a political and economic center, but also a hub of intrigue and surveillance, where the emperor's eyes were everywhere, and silence often meant survival. Life in Pataliputra was shaped by the delicate balance between authority and rebellion, loyalty and betrayal. Under the rule of Chandragupta Maurya, the city grew into a formidable seat of power. Chandragupta was a ruler who understood the importance of intelligence and control in maintaining his vast empire. He employed an extensive network of spies who listened to every whisper and watched every shadow in the city's bustling streets and quiet alleys. These agents of the state reported on the actions of nobles, merchants, and even common citizens, ensuring that no dissent could take root unnoticed. The presence of these spies created an atmosphere of constant vigilance, where trust was scarce and the fear of betrayal was ever present. The emperor's court was a place of both opulence and suspicion. Courtiers vied for favor, but they also kept their eyes open for rivals who might threaten their position. Political intrigue was a daily affair, and conspiracies were met with swift and often brutal punishments. Those who dared to defy the emperor or question his authority faced torture, exile, or execution. The harsh methods used to maintain control were a reflection of the challenges Chandragupta faced in ruling a vast and diverse empire. His reign was marked by both stability and fear, a testament to the complexities of power. Beyond the palaces and government buildings, the city's poorer residents lived very different lives. The slums of Pataliputra clung to the edges of the grand city, where overcrowding, poverty, and disease were common. These neighborhoods were often ignored by the ruling elite, yet they were vital to the city's economy, providing labor and services essential to its functioning. The poor lived under the constant threat of conscription into the army or forced labor on imperial projects, their freedoms severely limited. Their survival depended on resilience, community, and sometimes desperate measures. The contrast between wealth and poverty in Pataliputra was striking. Grand processions and religious festivals showcased the city's wealth and cultural richness, but behind the scenes, many struggled to find food and shelter. The emperor's court was a world of luxury and ceremony, filled with art, music, and religious devotion. Yet, just beyond the palace walls, the realities of life for ordinary people were harsh and unforgiving. This disparity created tensions that the state sought to control through surveillance and force. Trade and commerce flourished in Pataliputra, making it a vibrant and cosmopolitan city. Merchants and artisans from across the empire and beyond came to the city to sell their goods and services. The markets were lively and colorful, filled with the sounds and smells of a thriving urban center. Yet even in these bustling spaces, the presence of spies and informants ensured that nothing went unnoticed. Economic success was closely tied to political loyalty, and those who failed to navigate the city's complex social landscape risked falling into disfavor or worse. The city's religious life was equally complex. Pataliputra was home to many temples and shrines dedicated to a variety of gods and goddesses, reflecting the diversity of beliefs within the empire. Religious festivals were important public events, reinforcing social bonds and imperial authority. However, religion was also a tool of control, used by rulers and priests to legitimize power and encourage obedience. The intertwining of faith and politics added another layer to the city's intricate social fabric. Despite the omnipresent surveillance and strict control, Pataliputra was a city of ideas and cultural exchange. It was a place where scholars, artists, and thinkers could find patronage and support, contributing to the empire's rich intellectual life. Yet the freedom to express ideas was limited by political realities, and those who challenged the status quo risked persecution. The city's culture was thus a mixture of creativity and caution, innovation and conformity. The labyrinth of Pataliputra's streets and social networks was not just a physical reality, but also a metaphor for the challenges of living under a powerful empire. Navigating this maze required skill, loyalty, and sometimes a willingness to bend or break rules. The city's inhabitants, from nobles to commoners, constantly adapted to the shifting dynamics of power and survival. Their stories reveal the human dimension of life in a city that was both magnificent and merciless. The question remains, how did a city of grandeur become a labyrinth of fear? Pataliputra's history offers a window into the complexities of empire, where power is maintained through a combination of spectacle, surveillance, and sometimes ruthless repression. It reminds us that behind the achievements of ancient civilizations are stories of control, resistance, and the struggles of everyday people. The city's legacy challenges us to look beyond the monuments and to understand the lived experiences of those who built and endured the empire. In the end, Pataliputra stands as a testament to the dual nature of power, its capacity to inspire awe and to instill fear. It was a city where the dreams of rulers met the realities of governance, and where the lives of the powerful and the powerless were forever intertwined. Its story invites reflection on the costs of empire and the enduring human spirit that persists even in the face of oppression. The streets of Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire, were a vivid tapestry of life and death, grandeur and terror. This sprawling city rose majestically on an island in Lake Texcoco, connected by causeways to the mainland and teeming with thousands of inhabitants from all walks of life. Its towering temples, bustling markets, and vibrant public spaces spoke of an advanced civilization rich in culture, commerce, and religion. Yet beneath this surface of splendor lay a society marked by strict laws, harsh punishments, and a culture steeped in fear and sacrifice. Tenochtitlan was a city where power was absolute, obedience was demanded, and the shadow of death was never far away. In this empire, the sun god Huitzilopochtli was central to religious and political life. The Aztecs believed that the survival of the world depended on regular offerings of blood to the gods, a belief that justified rituals both awe-inspiring and horrifying. The most notorious of these were human sacrifices, where prisoners of war, criminals, or even volunteers were ritually killed atop temple pyramids. The victim's heart would be torn out and offered to the sun god in a dramatic ceremony that combined reverence with terror. These sacrifices were seen as necessary to sustain cosmic order and ensure the sun's daily rise, binding the people's fate to acts of profound violence. Justice in Tenochtitlan was swift and severe. Punishments for crimes such as theft, treason, or rebellion were often public and brutal, designed to serve as a warning to others. Those found guilty might be executed in the central square, sometimes by having their hearts ripped from their chests, or by other gruesome methods. The markets, usually places of commerce and social interaction, were also watched closely by priests and guards. Surveillance was constant, and any hint of disobedience or dissent was dealt with harshly. The city's laws were not only tools of order, but also instruments of control, maintaining the dominance of the ruling elite. The Aztec social structure was rigid, with clear divisions between nobles, commoners, slaves, and captives. Nobles enjoyed privileges and power, living in comfortable homes near the city center, while the common people and slaves occupied more modest dwellings on the city's outskirts. Despite this hierarchy, all were subject to the strict laws and expectations of the empire. The markets reflected this social complexity, with a vast array of goods ranging from everyday necessities to luxury items, but they were also spaces where power was negotiated and enforced. Traders, artisans, and farmers all played vital roles in the city's economy, but their freedoms were limited by the overarching demands of the state. Religious festivals and public ceremonies were central to life in Tenochtitlan, filling the city with color, music, and dance. These events reinforced social bonds and the legitimacy of the rulers, but they also served as reminders of the ever-present power of the gods and the state. The spectacle of sacrifice was a key element of these festivals, blending awe and fear to create a sense of unity and obedience among the populace. For many, participation in or witnessing these rituals was both a spiritual experience and a stark lesson in the consequences of defiance. The city's defense was as formidable as its culture was rich. Tenochtitlan was protected by a series of causeways, canals, and fortifications that made it difficult for enemies to penetrate. The Aztec military was highly organized, with trained warriors who were feared throughout the region. Military service was both a duty and a path to honor, and captives taken in battle were often destined for sacrifice. The constant readiness for war underscored the precariousness of life in the empire, where conflict and conquest were woven into the fabric of society. Despite its splendor, Tenochtitlan was not a city where escape from the empire's demands was easy. The poor, in particular, lived with a constant threat of conscription, punishment, and death. Their labor sustained the city's economy and its infrastructure, but they had little say in the governance of the empire. The strict social order and harsh laws limited their opportunities and freedoms, binding them to a system that prized obedience and sacrifice above all else. For many, life was a daily struggle against forces far greater than themselves. The question emerges, in a city of such splendor, what chance did the poor have to escape the jaws of empire? The answer lies in the complex realities of Aztec society, where power was centralized and social mobility was limited. The city's grandeur was built on the labor, loyalty, and often the blood of its people, especially those at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Their stories, though often lost to history, are essential to understanding the full picture of life in Tenochtitlan. The legacy of Tenochtitlan is one of both awe and tragedy. It was a city of incredible achievements in architecture, agriculture, and governance, yet it was also a place marked by violence and control. Its history challenges us to confront the ways in which societies use power and fear to maintain order and to consider the human cost of empire. Tenochtitlan's tale is a powerful reminder that the splendor of great cities often conceals the struggles and suffering of many. It invites us to look beyond monuments and myths to the realities of life lived under the shadow of power. The city's story is a window into the complex dynamics of civilization, where beauty and brutality are intertwined, and where the fate of individuals is shaped by forces both divine and human. In the end, Tenochtitlan stands as a testament to the complexities of empire, the intertwining of religion, power, and survival, and the enduring human stories behind the grandeur of history. Its streets and temples speak of a society both magnificent and merciless, challenging us to understand the full depth of its legacy. Throughout history, the world's most dangerous cities have been places where power, fear, and survival are in constant tension. From the grandeur of Babylon to the bloodied streets of Tenochtitlan, these cities reveal the harsh realities beneath the surface of civilization, the lives shaped by laws that protect the powerful while punishing the weak, the rituals that blend faith with violence, and the endless struggles of those caught in between. As we reflect on these ancient cities, it becomes clear that their stories are not just relics of the past, but echoes that still resonate in our modern world. These cities were often masterpieces of architecture and culture, centers of learning, trade, and religion that drew people from far and wide. Yet beneath their impressive facades lay societies built on inequalities, where justice was uneven and cruelty was sometimes a tool of control. The towering ziggurats, sprawling palaces, and bustling markets could not hide the fear and suffering that permeated the lives of many inhabitants. For every festival or grand procession, there were stories of pain, repression, and lost lives. The common thread through these cities is the way power was maintained, not just through armies or wealth, but through fear, surveillance, and sometimes brutality. Leaders and elites used laws, religion, and social structures to reinforce their dominance, often at great human cost. Spies, secret police, and informants wove a web of control that kept dissent in check and ensured loyalty, real or forced. This control created societies where trust was scarce, and survival often meant navigating a landscape of threats both visible and hidden. The ancient laws, whether written on stone or enforced by priests and rulers, often reflected a harsh and unforgiving world. Punishments were severe and public, serving as warnings to others and tools to maintain order. In these cities, justice was not always about fairness, but about preserving the existing hierarchy. Those with power protected themselves and their interests, while the poor, slaves, and outsiders lived with the constant risk of violence and exploitation. Religious beliefs and practices also played a complex role in these cities. Faith was a source of identity and community, but it was also intertwined with politics and control. Rituals of sacrifice, whether symbolic or horrifyingly literal, reinforced the authority of rulers and the gods they claimed to serve. These acts, performed in grand temples or hidden in secret ceremonies, were both expressions of devotion and means of instilling fear. Religion legitimized power and sometimes justified cruelty, making it a potent force in shaping society. Despite the fear and oppression, life in these cities was vibrant and dynamic. Markets bustled with traders, artisans crafted goods that dazzled, and festivals filled the streets with music, dance, and color. The cities were centers of innovation and culture, where ideas flowed and communities thrived, even amid danger. People found ways to resist, adapt, and survive, creating networks of support and moments of joy in a world often marked by hardship. The stories of these ancient cities also remind us of the resilience and complexity of human societies. They show that history is not just about rulers and conquests, but about the everyday lives of people, the merchants, soldiers, priests, slaves, and children who lived, loved, and struggled within these urban landscapes. Their experiences reveal the tensions and contradictions that define civilization. The pursuit of order and freedom, the interplay of fear and hope, the balance between tradition and change. As we consider the legacy of these cities, we see reflections of their patterns in the modern world. Inequality, surveillance, and the use of power to control populations continue to shape societies today. The echoes of ancient cruelty and resistance remind us that the challenges of justice, freedom, and human dignity are ongoing. The past teaches us that progress is fragile and that vigilance is necessary to protect the rights and well-being of all people. The histories of Babylon, Rome, Carthage, Sparta, Jerusalem, Tortuga, Alexandria, Pataliputra, and Tenochtitlan form a tapestry of human experience, rich, complex, and often painful. They show how cities can be both places of greatness and sites of suffering, how culture and cruelty can coexist, and how power can both build and destroy. Their stories invite us to reflect on our own cities and societies, urging us to learn from the past and strive for a future where fear and injustice no longer rule. In the end, the question remains, when cities become cages for the poor and voiceless, are we really so far from the past? The answer depends on how we choose to understand history and how we act in the present. These ancient cities challenge us to see beyond the monuments and myths, to listen to the voices of those who lived in the shadows, and to commit ourselves to building societies where justice and humanity prevail. Their stories are a call to remember that behind every great city are countless lives shaped by forces both visible and hidden, and that the true measure of a civilization lies not in its wealth or power, but in how it treats its most vulnerable. As we close this chapter of history, we carry with us the lessons of these cities, lessons about resilience, resistance, and the enduring human spirit that seeks dignity and hope amid the harshest conditions. And so, the tale of the most dangerous cities in the ancient world ends not with despair, but with a reminder of our shared humanity and the ongoing journey toward justice and compassion. May we heed these lessons and strive to create worlds where the shadows of fear are replaced by the light of understanding and the promise of a better tomorrow. Step outside. Take a deep breath. The cold hits your teeth before it reaches your lungs. it is not a breeze or a chill. It is a full body slap that creeps through your clothes and nestles into your bones like it plans to stay there. You are in Viking-age Scandinavia now, and whatever romantic notions you had about longboats, horned helmets, and adventurous seafaring have already frozen over. The first thing you would notice in this world is the cold. Real cold. Biting, relentless, heavy cold that hangs in the air for months and turns every breath into steam. This is not a place where the winter comes and goes politely. It parks itself over the land and dares you to try and live through it. If you were lucky, you might arrive in early spring or late summer when the light stretches long and the days are forgiving. But even then, the chill never fully disappears. It waits in the corners, reminding everyone that warmth is temporary. You wake up before sunrise, not because you are well rested, but because the sleeping platform is hard, your wool blanket itches, and the smoke from the fire has settled into your lungs. Viking longhouses were communal and practical. Built low to the ground with thick turf roofs and wooden beams, they were meant to keep heat in and the wind out. Windows were small or non-existent. Instead, light came from a central hearth, which also provided warmth and cooking fire. The air inside was always a little smoky, always a little damp. Your clothes smell of wood, ash, and wool before you even put them on. You are not alone in the longhouse. Families live together, sometimes with servants, farmhands, and livestock. Privacy is a rare thing. You might hear someone snoring, a child fussing, a dog shifting near the doorway. The animals are stabled at the far end, their warmth helping heat the room. It is not dirty by medieval standards, but it is not fresh either. Life here is too busy for constant scrubbing. You wipe your hands on your tunic and step carefully across the packed earth floor. Breakfast is not a feast. You might get some flatbread, maybe a bit of dried fish or leftover porridge. Food is seasonal, practical, and preserved through salting, smoking, or drying. Fresh milk if you are lucky, goat's milk more likely than cow. Honey is rare. Fruit even rarer in these northern climates. You eat what was saved from the last harvest or what the sea gives you that day. And you eat quickly because there is work to do. Everyone works. Children herd animals. Women spin wool, churn butter, tend fires, and manage the household. Men farm, fish, hunt, and sometimes prepare for trade or raiding. Tools are basic: axes, knives, hoes, and sickles. Made by hand, sharpened by stone. You do not have gloves with insulation or waterproof boots with comfortable soles. Your hands are chapped, your feet are cold, and your back aches before noon. And then there is the wind. It never really stops. It slices across the fjords and fields, rattling shutters, curling around door frames, pushing smoke back down chimneys. The land is stunning. Yes, cliffs and forests and waters so clear you can see the stones at the bottom, but it does not care if you admire it. It wants you to survive, not enjoy. The sense of danger is not just in the weather. It is in the community. Viking society is close-knit and cooperative, but it is also proud, violent, and built on reputation. Honor matters. A careless insult, a debt unpaid, or a boundary crossed can turn into a blood feud. Everyone carries knives. Warriors train with axes and spears. Even in peaceful villages, the tension hums just below the surface. You do not make careless jokes here. You do not speak without thinking. Words are sharp and often remembered longer than wounds. You would feel it as an outsider that you are being watched, measured, judged. The Vikings respected strength, courage, and loyalty. They respected hard work and self-reliance. But they had little patience for softness, indecision, or complaint. To them, life was not supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be endured, shaped, challenged, and eventually ended with some kind of meaning. The daily rhythm is long and physical. You help haul water from a stream. You chop wood, carry stones, mend fences, and gather whatever can be gathered. You do this whether you are tired, sore, or cold, because if you stop, the work does not get done. And if the work does not get done, the household suffers. No one gets to be idle. Rest is a reward, not a right. The sun rises late and sets early, especially in winter. Light is precious. Candles are expensive. Torches are smoky. You learn to do as much as possible while the sky is gray and to settle in once the dark falls. The night brings stories, warmth by the fire, and perhaps the distant sound of a wolf howling in the forest. You listen, half scared and half in awe, because this land, for all its hardship, is beautiful in a way that feels almost sacred. You go to bed on straw, wrapped in wool, your limbs sore, your nose cold. Your ears are filled with the sound of the fire crackling and someone quietly coughing on the other side of the room. There is no bath to climb into, no blanket of silence, no softness to hold you. Just your own body, the smell of smoke, and the rhythm of survival. And you have only been here one day. In the next part, we will explore the heart of Viking society, the household, and the roles that kept it alive. From gender expectations to social customs, from hospitality to hard discipline, we will take a closer look at the fabric of daily life that bound this cold world together and made it more than just hard, it made it home. By now, the chill has settled into your shoulders and your feet have gone from cold to numb. But there is no stopping to warm up. The Viking household waits for no one. Everyone has their place, and in this world, place matters more than comfort. It defines your role, your duties, and your chances of surviving the long winters and the longer expectations. At the center of it all is the home, not just the structure, but the family. The longhouse is not a private space. It is shared. It is structured. And within its walls there is a rhythm of living that touches every member, every day. Everyone works. Everyone contributes. And if you do not know your role, you will learn it quickly or feel the consequences. The head of the household is not just a figurehead. He is a chieftain in miniature, responsible for the land, the livestock, the tools, and the people under his roof. His word carries weight. He is expected to be firm, decisive, and just. He solves disputes among family members. He decides when to plant and when to harvest. He leads prayers to the gods and pours the first offering of ale at feasts. He is expected to be a provider, a protector, and at times a warrior. But Viking women are not silent or sidelined. Far from it. A Viking woman manages the household. She controls the food, the clothing, the hearth. She keeps the keys literally. A set of keys often hung at her belt, symbolizing her control over storage, supplies, and often wealth. She oversees spinning and weaving, bread baking, and the preserving of meat and fish. When the men are away on raids or at sea, she runs the farm. She is respected, and her word carries power. If a woman of the house says a guest is unwelcome, they do not stay. If she says the grain is low, no one argues. Children learn early. From the moment they can walk, they are given small tasks: feeding chickens, gathering kindling, fetching water. Boys are taught to handle tools, to herd, to fish. Girls learn to spin wool, shape dough, tend the fire. There is no school in the modern sense. Learning comes through watching, through doing, through listening. If you ask too many questions, someone might answer, or they might tell you to be quiet and pay attention. There is little room for softness. Discipline is part of daily life. A child who refuses work is shamed. A teenager who shows disrespect may be struck or sent to do the most miserable tasks in silence. There is affection, certainly. Parents love their children, but they do not coddle them. Every person is being prepared for the hardships to come, because hardship is guaranteed. Childhood is brief. Expectation comes quickly. Then there are the slaves known as thralls. You would see them in most Viking households, especially among the wealthier farmers and landowners. They are at the bottom of the social ladder, with no freedom and little comfort. They chop wood, carry loads, tend animals, and clean the filth that others will not. Some are captured in raids. Others are born into bondage. They are fed last and punished quickly. Yet even they have roles. They are not invisible. They are tools the household depends on, and in some cases they can earn their way to freedom. Slowly, rarely. Meals are a shared experience, but also a reflection of the hierarchy. Everyone eats, but not equally. The head of the house is served first. The food is hearty but plain. Stew with barley, cabbage, and dried meat. Bread baked on hot stones. Sometimes fish, if the nets were full. Beer or mead is poured when available, but water or milk is more common. Everyone sits on benches or floor mats. There are few plates, few utensils. You eat with your hands and you eat fast. Conversation is brief, unless it is a feast day. Hospitality is serious business. If a guest arrives, the household is expected to offer food, a place to sit, perhaps a blanket near the fire. This is not simply kindness, it is duty. To turn away a traveler is to shame your house. Yet even here, rules apply. A guest may eat and rest, but they must not overstay. They must be respectful, because once they cross your threshold, they are under your protection. If they bring trouble, that trouble becomes yours. In the evenings, work does not stop, it just changes shape. Wool is spun, tools are repaired. Children are told stories not for amusement, but to teach. Tales of gods, of heroes, of honor and loss. These stories carry lessons: how to act, what to value, why courage matters more than comfort. Laughter is allowed, but noise is not. The fire is tended carefully. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is taken for granted. The bonds within the household are strong. These are the people who will fight for you, mourn you, feed you when your hands are too weak to hold a spoon, but they are also the ones who will expect much of you. You cannot drift along. You must contribute. You must hold your place. There is no room for laziness, for confusion, for withdrawal. Everyone knows what is expected, and they live by it. Marriage is arranged more often than chosen. It is a joining of families, of farms, of fortunes. Love may come later, or it may not. What matters is trust, reliability, shared effort. A spouse who cannot pull their weight is a burden. A spouse who defies their role brings shame. Marriage is not a private affair. It is a social contract, and the whole community watches to see how it unfolds. Even in death, the household plays a role. The body is washed by kin. Goods are prepared for burial or cremation. A feast is held in their honor. The ancestors are remembered, their names spoken at gatherings, their deeds recited, because to be forgotten is to die twice. And if a household forgets its dead, what else might it forget? Could you survive here, even for a week? You might marvel at the strength of the people. You might admire their sense of duty, their closeness, their pride. But you would feel the weight of their expectations. You would feel the heat of their judgment, and you would realize quickly that there is no time to adjust, no learning curve. You are either useful or you are not. In the next part, we will turn to the Viking understanding of law, order, and justice. In a world without police or prisons, how were wrongs set right? How was justice delivered in a society that prized honor over rules and revenge over restraint? The answer may surprise you and might make you grateful for modern courtrooms. There is no courthouse, no gavel, no black-robed judge sitting behind a desk. If you are looking for a justice system that feels organized and neutral, you will not find it here. Viking law was many things practical, communal, and deeply rooted in custom, but it was not gentle, and it was never distant. It did not come from faceless institutions. It came from the people themselves. It came from memory, from voice, from honor. And if you broke those rules, it would not be a quiet letter in the mail. It would be a reckoning. Laws in Viking Scandinavia were not written down in books. They were memorized and recited by the law speaker, a respected figure who served both as judge and historian. He stood at the center of the assembly, often outdoors, and recited the law from memory, section by section as needed. His voice carried the weight of generations, and his knowledge was considered sacred. People gathered in a circle to hear him speak, and there was no need for paper. The law lived in stories, in precedent, in the minds of those who had heard it all before. Disputes were handled in the thing, the assembly. Every free man had the right to attend. There were local things and larger regional ones. These meetings were not only about law. They were social, political, and religious gatherings. But when a conflict came up, it was handled publicly. Both sides made their case. Witnesses stepped forward. Oaths were sworn. And eventually, a verdict was given. But justice was rarely about guilt or innocence in the way we think of it today. It was about restoring balance. If a man stole livestock, he might be fined. If he refused to pay, or if the theft was particularly bold, he might be declared an outlaw. That meant more than just a legal status. It meant he was outside the protection of society. Anyone could harm him without consequence. He could not own property, could not be helped by others, could not find refuge. It was a social death, often followed by a physical one. Fines were common punishments: silver, livestock, or goods. Paying the right amount at the right time could settle even serious offenses, but it only worked if both sides agreed. If someone refused a judgment, or if the crime was deeply personal, things could spiral. Feuds were a real part of Viking life. They could last for years. Families marked by blood might respond to one wrong with another until someone finally broke the chain or both sides were too wounded to continue. There were efforts to prevent this. Marriage was sometimes used to end a feud, tying families together. Compensation was encouraged, but in practice, pride often won out. Reputation mattered more than peace. A man who let an insult go unpunished might lose face in the eyes of his neighbors. A family that accepted too little compensation might be seen as weak, and weakness was dangerous. Theft, assault, slander, broken oaths, land disputes all had their place in Viking law. But so did more intimate wrongs. Adultery could bring shame and revenge. Insults were not taken lightly. To call someone a coward, a cheat, or worse, to question their honor in front of others could spark violence. Words had power. A single insult, spoken at the wrong moment, could cost you more than your pride. It could cost you your life. Executions were rare but not unknown. Hanging was sometimes used. So was beheading. But the more common form of punishment was exile. Being sent away from the community, from your land, from your name. It was devastating. It stripped you of protection, of family, of meaning. And in the wilderness of Scandinavia, exile was not just punishment. It was a death sentence in disguise. But Viking law was not all blood and vengeance. It had structure. It had rules. Property was respected. Inheritance was carefully outlined. Women could own land, bring cases to the Thing, and demand justice for wrongs done to them. There were protections against false accusations. There were expected standards for contracts and trade. Oaths were serious business. To swear falsely was not just a legal offense, it was a spiritual one. The gods were believed to watch over oaths, and to break one was to invite their wrath. Honor was the glue that held all of this together. It was not a vague concept. It was a measurable thing. Your word, your strength, your fairness, your loyalty, these were the markers of a person's worth. Lose your honor, and you lost your place in society. Gain it, and doors opened. Battles were fought not just with blades, but with reputation. A man known to be honorable might avoid a fight entirely. His name was enough. This is why law and violence were so intertwined. The system depended on community enforcement. There were no police officers patrolling the streets. If someone wronged you, it was your duty to bring the case forward. If the judgment went in your favor, it was your responsibility to collect the fine or carry out the consequences. The community supported this, but only if you followed the rules. Justice was personal, and yet bound by collective understanding. Could you survive in such a system? Maybe. If you learned quickly, listened well, and understood that in this world every action echoed, people remembered. They told stories. They judged you not just by what you did, but by how you responded when wronged. Did you stand up for yourself? Did you seek revenge too quickly? Did you forgive too easily? Every choice shaped your name. and your name, once shaped, followed you for life. In the next part, we will enter the smoky, stormy world of Viking religion and ritual where gods walked alongside men, where offerings were burned in sacred groves, and where life and death were tied to forces far older than memory. A world where cleaning your axe might be as important as cleaning your soul. Before the first frost settled on the grass, before your hand reached for your boots, the gods were already watching. In Viking Scandinavia, religion was not something reserved for holy days or private prayers. It lived in the smoke rising from the hearth. It walked in the creak of the trees. It sat with you during meals and followed you out into the snow. The Norse gods were not distant figures trapped in scrolls or churches. They were neighbors, sometimes helpful, sometimes terrible, always near. The world, according to Viking belief, was not made once and then left to run. It was always being made, always being shaped by the gods, by giants, by spirits, and by the choices of mortals. There were 9 realms, each connected by Yggdrasil, the great world tree. You lived in Midgard, the realm of humans. But around you were the halls of gods and monsters, light and shadow, flame and frost. Everything you did was part of this balance. The gods themselves were not perfect. That was part of their power. Odin, the Allfather, was wise but ruthless. He gave up his eye for knowledge and hung himself on the world tree for 9 days to gain the secrets of runes. Thor, his son, was mighty and straightforward, the protector of humans, but also quick to anger and prone to smashing things first and asking questions never. Freya, goddess of love and war, could cry tears of gold and also lead the dead into battle. Loki, the trickster, twisted everything clever, cruel, and unpredictable. These were not comforting deities. They were not there to reward good behavior or forgive sins. They were forces of nature, of fate, of identity. People did not worship them to be saved. They honored them to survive. Offerings were made often. Food, drink, handmade goods, even blood. Sacred groves and stones marked places of ritual. Small statues stood in homes or were carved into ship prows. At seasonal festivals, animals were sacrificed and their blood sprinkled on altars, people, and walls. The act was not cruel, it was sacred. Life given to honor life. The most important rituals were communal. Blot's sacrifices and feasts were held to mark the seasons, to call for luck in harvests, to ask for protection in voyages or raids. Meat was cooked, ale was poured, songs were sung. The gods were invoked by name. Their favor was not begged for, it was bargained for. If you give us safe passage, we will build you a shrine. If you bless our crops, we will honor you at winter's end. And not all the gods were far away. Ancestors were part of daily religious life. The dead were not gone. They were still with you. They watched over your home, guarded your land, whispered warnings in your dreams. Burial customs reflected this belief. A respected elder might be buried with their tools, their weapons, even their animals. Their grave might become a place of quiet visits and offerings. The dead could protect, or if offended, they could haunt. The most feared concept in Viking religion was not sin. It was fate. Called word or urlug in Old Norse ideas, fate was not something you could change. It was woven by the Norns, 3 shadowy figures, who spun the threads of every life. Even the gods could not escape what the Norns had written. Your death was already set. You could not avoid it. You could only meet it well. This made courage a central virtue. A coward might live longer, but they would be remembered with shame. A brave warrior who fell in battle might be welcomed to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where Odin gathered fighters for the final battle of the world. Others might go to Folkvang, Freya's Field, or Hel, a misty realm ruled by a goddess of the same name. None of these were punishments in the way some religions promise. They were destinations, places for souls, each reflecting the life they had lived. And so the daily rituals were not just for show. Before a hunt, you might offer a few drops of mead to the earth. Before a voyage, you might trace runes into the wood of your ship. When a child was born, their naming was a serious rite. The father lifted the baby, named them, and in doing so, claimed them. Until then, the child was not fully part of the community. Even names carried meaning. A name with honor gave a child strength. A weak name could curse them. Rituals also governed justice. Oaths were made with hand on a ring or blade. Breaking them was not only shameful, it was dangerous. The gods were listening. To lie under oath was to invite ruin. At legal gatherings, witnesses swore to speak truth in the name of the gods. At weddings, couples asked for the blessings of Frigg and Freya. At funerals, the deceased's life was praised, and their spirit was sent on its way with fire, gifts, and sometimes a ship set alight in the sea. Even the home was a spiritual space. Hearths were sacred. The fire was never treated carelessly. It was a symbol of life, warmth, and protection. A quiet offering of bread or ale placed by the hearth was not superstition. It was part of keeping balance, of showing respect for the spirits of the house. A well-run home was not just clean and warm, it was spiritually steady. There were also fears. Not every spirit was friendly. The land was full of hidden folk, strange creatures, and restless dead. Some people spoke of Draugr, undead beings that rose from their graves to torment the living. Protection charms were carved into door frames or worn around the neck. Children were given amulets. Warriors carried runes etched into bone or metal. Women used carved symbols to protect their children or curse their enemies. And magic was real, or at least believed to be. Seers and wise women known as vulvas held great respect. They traveled between communities, offering visions, guidance, and ritual knowledge. Some used staffs, others sang in trances. Their power was feared, especially by men, because it was mysterious and not fully understood. Odin himself was said to have learned magic from women, a fact that made some uneasy even among his followers. Could you live under this spiritual pressure? It was not crushing, but it was constant. Every act had weight. Every choice echoed. You were never alone. Not really. The gods were not waiting to punish you. They were waiting to be honored, to be remembered, to be shown that you understood the truth. You are a thread in a much larger cloth. The more you respect that, the stronger your thread becomes. In the next part, we will follow the Vikings into the wild to the coasts, the mountains, and the deep woods where food was gathered, hunted, or fished. Because in this land, survival meant knowing nature intimately, fearing it respectfully, and learning to live alongside it without ever expecting it to be kind. If you woke up hungry in Viking Scandinavia, you had a long day ahead of you. There were no markets stocked with fresh bread, no corner inns selling stew, no stocked shelves to browse. If you wanted to eat, you had to find it, catch it, grow it, or store it. And none of that was easy. The land was not generous. It could be beautiful, yes, but it was also stubborn and cold. A single mistake could mean hunger. A few unlucky seasons could mean death. You started with what you had. Most Viking families kept animals, goats, sheep, pigs, maybe a few cows if they were fortunate. These were not pets. They were livelihood. Goats gave milk, which could be made into cheese. Sheep gave wool and sometimes meat. Pigs were useful for everything from fat to leather. Chickens were kept when possible, but their eggs were a luxury, and keeping them alive through the winter was a constant battle against predators and the cold. Milking was done early, often before the sun was up. You sat on a low stool, careful not to startle the animal, working quickly in the dim light. It was cold work, but important. Every drop counted. Milk was turned into cheese and stored in earthen pots for leaner times. Meat was rarely eaten fresh. Most of it was salted, dried, or smoked. A single pig could feed a family for months if preserved properly, and wasting any part of it was unthinkable. Then there were the fields. Farming in Viking Scandinavia was hard, seasonal labor. The soil was rocky, the growing season short, and the weather unpredictable. Barley, rye, and oats were the staples. These grains were used to make flatbread, porridge, and ale. Every step from sowing to harvesting was done by hand, with tools made of wood, bone, or iron. No plows pulled by machines, just bodies, bent backs, and time. Weeding, harvesting, threshing, drying, each job took time and care. Rain at the wrong moment could ruin a whole crop. Too much cold, too early frost, and the season could end before it truly began. Families stored grain in pits lined with straw or clay. Rats, mold, and moisture were constant threats. If your stores ran low during the winter, you rationed, you stretched the flour. You ate more broth and fewer bites of bread. Hunger was not a stranger. It visited often and left slowly. Fishing was a lifeline. Rivers, lakes, and the sea provided food when the land could not. Nets were woven by hand. Hooks were carved from bone. Boats were simple and sturdy, pushed out into frigid waters with nothing but muscle and wind to guide them. Men fished for cod, herring, and salmon. Women gathered shellfish and seaweed. Smokehouses stood near the waterline, filling the air with the scent of drying fish. It was a heavy smell, but to Viking families, it was the smell of survival. Hunting added meat to the table, but it was not reliable. Deer, boar, elk, these animals were strong, fast, and dangerous. A single hunt could last days. A single mistake could cost your life. Traps were used for smaller game. Snares for rabbits, pits for wild pigs. Birds were shot with bows, caught with nets, or taken from their nests. Every feather, bone, and scrap was used. Nothing was wasted because nothing was promised. Foraging was just as important. In spring and summer, families gathered berries, nuts, mushrooms, and herbs. They dried what they could and stored it in linen sacks or clay jars. Birch sap was collected for drinking, roots were dug up and boiled, wild onions, garlic, sorrel all added flavor and nutrition to the otherwise heavy and repetitive meals. Children helped with this, learning from an early age which plants healed, which poisoned, and which could fill a belly just enough to keep going. In the coldest months, when the snow pressed against the longhouse walls and the sky stayed dim for most of the day, food became monotony. Dried fish, salted meat, thin porridge. You chewed slowly, not to savor, but to make it last. There was no feasting unless it was a special time, a marriage, a birth, a funeral. On those days, animals were slaughtered, ovens were heated, and the whole community gathered. But when the feast ended, it was back to broth, bread, and waiting for spring. Water came from wells, streams, or rain. It was boiled if it seemed unsafe, flavored with herbs if it tasted too stale. Ale and mead were drunk when available, partly because they were safer than stagnant water, and partly because they brought some warmth to long nights. Making ale was a household task, usually overseen by women. Grain was soaked, boiled, fermented, and stored. A strong batch could keep for months and lift spirits in more ways than one. But food was not just nourishment, it was identity. The way you prepared your bread, the herbs you used, the way you preserved your fish, these details told others who you were. A generous host was respected. A stingy one remembered. Hospitality was sacred, and a hungry guest was never turned away. Even if supplies were thin, something would be offered. Warm broth, a piece of dried meat, a crust of bread. To share food was to keep society alive. Could you thrive in this world of constant work? It would be hard. The labor never stopped. The cold never paused. You would feel hunger more often than you ever have. You would feel soreness in your arms, your back, your knees. You would feel fear when the weather turned or the crops failed. And yet, you might feel something else too, purpose. A kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing every bite was earned. Every meal came from your own hands, your own sweat, your own knowledge of the land. And you would never forget that in this place, food was not convenience, it was life. In the next part, we will turn to warfare, the raids, the weapons, the training, and the reputation that made Viking warriors both feared and admired. We will look past the myths and into the muddy, blood-soaked truth of what it meant to be a fighter in a world where honor and violence were tightly bound. You would not last long in a Viking raid. That is not an insult, just a simple truth. Because everything you think you know about being a warrior has likely come from fiction. Glorious battles, shining swords, and dramatic one-on-one duels. But the real life of a Viking fighter was harsh, messy, and terrifying. Before you even lifted an axe, you had to live like a fighter, eat like one, sleep like one, think like one, and most importantly, never show fear like one. You would have trained from childhood. Boys were taught to use weapons the same way others learned to tie knots or sharpen knives. It started with wooden sticks and progressed to iron blades. They were taught to handle a sword, swing an axe, shoot a bow, and use a shield with precision. Not for sport, not for honor, for survival. A missed swing in training could mean a broken bone. A mistake in real battle could mean your head rolling across the mud. A Viking warrior was not simply strong. He had to be fast, clever, and durable. You carried your weapons everywhere, often slung across your back or strapped to your belt. A good axe was worth more than gold. A sword, even more so. Swords were expensive, forged over days or weeks, passed down from father to son. They were named, praised in poems, decorated with runes, but they were also stained with blood, chipped from bone, and heavy, very heavy. Armor was rare. Some warriors had chainmail, but most relied on layered wool, leather, and tough skin. Shields were made of wood with iron bosses at the center, round and broad enough to protect the body, but light enough to move quickly. Helmets existed, but forget the horns. Those were myths born centuries later. Real helmets were practical iron domes with nose guards, sometimes padded inside with wool or fur. And yes, they hurt to wear. Raiding was not about chaos. It was planned, strategic, and coordinated. Longships were prepared months in advance. Supplies were gathered, weapons checked, crews selected carefully. You did not just sail off in a random direction. You targeted villages, monasteries, ports, anywhere wealth could be taken quickly. Speed was the key. Surprise was the weapon. You landed before anyone had time to react. And if you did your job right, you were gone before the local warriors could organize a response. But when battle came, it was not pretty. No marching lines, no neat formations, just close, brutal fighting. Blades met bone, arrows hissed through the air, blood soaked the grass. You screamed not just from fury, but to scare your enemy and keep your courage intact. You fought next to your brother, your friend, your uncle. You kept your back against theirs and hoped no blade found its way into your ribs. Wounds were expected, so were deaths. You did not weep on the battlefield. You did not stop to cradle a fallen comrade. If you did, you might be next. The goal was to survive and to win. If you made it out alive, with loot in your hand and no axe in your back, that was a victory. And victory brought more than spoils. It brought status. In Viking culture, a warrior's reputation was everything. Your name carried stories. Your scars were badges of worth. If you ran from battle, if you begged for mercy, if you broke ranks that followed you, it followed your family. It became part of your name, whispered in mead halls and muttered at feasts. The worst thing a man could be called was coward. The second worst was oath-breaker. There was no formal army, no national force. Warriors gathered under chieftains or kings for specific campaigns. Sometimes they fought for land, sometimes for revenge, sometimes just for silver. When they returned home, they were expected to defend their villages, join the local thing, and uphold the law. But fighting was never far away. Even a small insult could lead to a duel. Even a land dispute could erupt into bloodshed. Weapons were not just tools of violence, they were symbols. An axe meant labor and war. A sword meant power and legacy. A spear meant tradition, Odin's weapon. To carry a blade was to declare that you were ready to defend your name, your kin, your land. To take up arms was to participate in a sacred cycle of survival and meaning. Even in peace, a Viking was never far from battle. He trained regularly. He kept his weapons sharp. He told stories of past victories and listened to tales of heroes long dead. War was not glorified without reason. It was remembered because it shaped everything, and it was feared. Not every warrior wanted to fight. Many would have preferred peace, but peace was temporary. Honor was permanent. And it was not just men. Women, while not usually part of raiding parties, were known to fight when needed. Sagas tell of shield maidens, fierce women who took up arms to defend their homes or accompany warriors into battle. Whether these figures were rare exceptions or more common than records suggest, their stories mattered. They showed that strength was not limited by gender, it was measured by spirit. Could you survive a Viking battlefield? If you froze at the first clash of steel, you would not last a minute. If you stumbled under the weight of your shield, you would be trampled. If you hesitated when someone charged at you with a spear, you would be buried with it still in your chest. There were no warm-ups, no do-overs, only instinct, grit, and muscle. And even if you survived, your body would never be the same. Broken fingers, split lips, crushed ribs, these were common souvenirs of even small fights. But if you endured, you earned something priceless in this world: respect. A warrior who returned from battle alive was a man whose name was remembered. A man who fought with courage was honored in song. A man who died with his blade in hand was believed to ride to the afterlife not in silence, but in the roaring halls of Valhalla. In the next part, we will step away from the battlefield and into the heart of Viking craft, the tools, the ships, the homes, the things made by hand that allowed this society to thrive in a land that gave little and demanded much, because strength alone did not build the Viking world. Skill did. And without it, no one warrior or not would have made it through the winter. You could be the strongest warrior in your village, but if you could not shape a blade, build a roof, or stitch a tunic, you would still be helpless in Viking Scandinavia. Here, strength and survival were measured not just by muscle, but by hands that could build, repair, and create. Everyone was expected to know how to do something useful. Because when nothing came easy, everything had to be earned, not just with blood, but with skill. Let us begin with the most famous creation of the Viking world, the longship. These boats were more than just transportation. They were lifelines, tools of war, vessels of trade, and symbols of power. Building one required months of labor and a deep knowledge of wood, water, and weather. First, the trees. Oak was preferred strong, flexible, durable, but oak did not cut itself. You had to trek into the forest, choose the right tree, fell it, and haul it back. And that was just step one. Next came the shaping. Planks had to be carved and fitted with precision. Viking shipbuilders used the clinker method, overlapping planks and fastening them with iron rivets. Each plank had to bend just enough without splitting. Every rib had to match the hull's curve. The keel, the spine of the ship, was carved from a single piece of timber. Mistake it, and the ship would twist or sink. And there were no blueprints. Everything was passed down through memory, repetition, and tradition. When the ship was done, it was not just admired, it was named, it was blessed, and then it was used filled with warriors, goods, or explorers ready to cross seas that most people feared to look at. Viking ships were fast, silent, and deadly when needed. But behind every voyage was a craftsman who had put his life into the wood. Back on land, another kind of fire burned the forge. The blacksmith was not just someone who hammered metal. He was a vital figure in the community. Without him, there were no nails, no knives, no horseshoes, no axe heads. Iron had to be smelted from ore, heated in furnaces stoked with charcoal, then beaten into shape with sweat and rhythm. A good blade had to balance sharpness with strength. A bad one could shatter in a fight and cost a man his life. Blacksmiths also made tools, plowshares, hinges, locks, rivets. These were not extras. They were what held the world together. Every item had to be made by hand, shaped by fire and hammer, cooled in water or oil. There were no spares, no stores to replace what was lost. If something broke, it had to be repaired or rebuilt. And the blacksmith did not work alone. Apprentices watched, fetched tools, pumped the bellows, and learned through burns and blisters what it meant to truly shape metal. Textile work might seem less dramatic, but it was just as essential. Clothing had to be made by hand from raw material. Wool was sheared from sheep in the spring. It was washed, combed, spun into yarn, and then woven on looms into fabric. This took weeks, sometimes longer. Women and girls worked the looms while singing or telling stories. A single tunic might take months to finish. Thread had to be dyed with plant-based colors, woad for blue, madder for red, birch leaves for yellow. And once cloth was made, it was sewn by hand into garments strong enough to handle daily life and harsh weather. Shoes were made from leather cured, shaped, and stitched. Belts, bags, straps, and harnesses all came from hides. Leather workers soaked skins in lye, scraped off hair, softened the leather with oils or animal fat, and then cut it to shape. Everything was designed to last. Nothing was thrown away unless it was completely useless. Even scraps could be turned into patches, soles, or ties. Woodworkers were the quiet backbone of Viking society. They built houses, carved bowls, shaped tools, and repaired wagons. They carved runestones in idols. They built beds, benches, storage chests, and doors. A Viking house needed beams cut just right, walls fitted with care, and joints secured without nails. It was all done with hand tools, axes, adzes, chisels. Precision was earned through years of mistakes. And then there was the craft that touched every part of life rope. Rope made from hemp, flax, or animal sinew. Braided by hand, soaked in oil, stretched and twisted until it was strong enough to pull a cart or tie down a sail in a storm. A frayed rope could mean a lost boat. A weak one could snap and shatter a man's leg. So even the humble rope maker carried great responsibility. None of this labor was optional. Everyone contributed. Children learned early. Boys were handed knives to whittle. Girls spun wool while still young. Even elders, long past their strength, were given tasks sharpening blades, fixing nets, watching the fire. There was no retirement. There was only adjustment, because hands that worked were still valuable, no matter how old. Craft was not just function. It was pride. A well-made bowl was praised. A beautiful tunic admired. Carved patterns on wood beams, decorated shields, woven borders, these were not luxuries. They were proof of skill, A man who built a strong home was respected. A woman whose cloth never frayed was honored. And a boy who could shape his first tool was growing into someone the village could rely on. Could you make something by hand? Could you build a fire, sharpen a blade, stitch a seam, hammer a nail, all without modern tools or shortcuts? Could you do it in the cold, in the dark, with fingers numb from wind and arms sore from splitting wood the day before? You might think it would be slow, frustrating, maybe even boring. But once your hands got used to it, once your back stopped aching quite so much, you would feel something else, something rare. Purpose. In a world where everything was made by someone you knew, your work meant something. You saw it in the clothes people wore, the tools they used, the ships they sailed. Your hands were not just busy, they were needed. In the next part, we will return to the home, not just the physical space, but the rhythms of family, tradition, and gender roles. What did it really mean to be a Viking man or woman? What were the expectations, the freedoms, and the burdens carried by both? Because even in a world shaped by axes and frost, identity was not built only on strength. It was built on duty. And duty in Viking Scandinavia was everything. In Viking Scandinavia, there was no pause button for gender roles. The moment you could walk and carry weight, you were being shaped into something. Not just a person, but a provider, a protector, a caretaker, or a builder. Boys and girls were raised knowing exactly what was expected of them. And while the lines between roles were sometimes blurred by necessity or strength of character, the foundations were carved deep. A man was supposed to lead, defend, provide, and be seen. A woman was supposed to manage, nurture, preserve, and be remembered. Those sound simple on the surface, but they came with layers of expectation and pressure that few modern people could truly handle. In Viking homes, gender was not just identity, it was function. It was woven into the fabric of daily life and held everything together. Let us begin with boys. From a young age, they were expected to help with physical work, herding sheep, gathering wood, learning how to wield a knife, and eventually handling weapons. They followed their fathers and older brothers into the fields, into the woods, and into the forge. They learned through action. They learned through pain. A scraped hand, a bruised shoulder, a burnt thumb, these were just part of the process. But being a man was not only about strength. It was about reputation. Boys were taught to speak clearly, to keep promises, to defend their family's honor, and to never show fear. Cowardice was worse than failure. Silence in the face of injustice was shameful. They were encouraged to be bold, but also wise. A hot temper could start a feud. An ill-timed word could cost a life. Being a man meant walking a narrow path between pride and control. By the time a boy reached his early teens, he was expected to contribute like a grown man. He could be called to join a raid. He could be married off if the arrangement suited both families. He could take oaths, own tools, and even make decisions within the household. But that trust came with pressure. One bad decision could ruin a season's harvest. One mistake on a boat could sink it. Manhood was not celebrated with parties. It was earned through quiet endurance. Now look across the hearth and you will see the girls. They were not playing house. They were learning how to keep one running. Girls helped with everything. They spun wool, cooked meals, fed livestock, cleaned tools, dried herbs, and soothed crying siblings. And they watched their mothers. A Viking woman carried the keys to the household literally. A ring of keys often hung at her waist, symbolic of her control over storage, food, trade goods, and domestic order. Women managed households in every sense. They oversaw servants, including slaves. They tracked supplies. They prepared for winter months with mathematical precision. If the farm ran out of cheese in February, or lost 3 chickens to a fox, that failure fell on the woman. If she kept the family fed and the home warm through the darkest months, her praise came not in public song, but in quiet respect from her community. Marriage was a contract, not a romance. Girls were often married in their mid-teens, usually to older men. But this was not as one-sided as some might think. A woman brought value to her marriage, sometimes in the form of land, sometimes livestock, sometimes skill. And once married, she held real power in the household. If her husband died, she became the head of the family. If he traveled, she ran the estate. A woman could own property, divorce her husband, and even demand compensation for wrongdoing. That kind of legal presence was rare in the medieval world. But the burden was heavy. A woman could not afford to be weak. She was expected to raise strong children, keep the fire burning, trade wisely, and maintain peace with neighbors. If a fight broke out within the household, she was the one who was expected to restore order. If a guest arrived unexpectedly, she prepared the meal and offered shelter, regardless of her own exhaustion. And if a threat appeared at the door, she stood ready to defend her home with whatever tool was within reach. There were stories of shield maidens, women who took up arms and fought in battle. While it is debated how common this was, the sagas are filled with fierce women. Some led households, others rode into war. These women were not fantasy. They reflected the Viking belief that strength came in many forms. If a woman could wield a blade or lead a crew, her gender was no barrier to respect. Still, the daily life of most Viking women was rooted in the home. But that home was a fortress, a workplace, a nursery, a kitchen, a trade post, and a sacred space. Managing it took intelligence, skill, and endurance, and no matter how rough the weather or short the food, a Viking woman was expected to adapt, adjust, and never let her household fall. Children, too, understood these roles early. A daughter might be helping churn butter one day and delivering messages between farms the next. A son might be mending a net before dawn and training with a spear after dark. There was no adolescence in the modern sense. Childhood was short, and responsibility came quickly. Could you handle these roles? Could you rise before the sun to tend a fire and knead dough before preparing bandages for a sick child? Could you spend your day tracking sheep through rain, splitting logs, and still be expected to speak well at a gathering of men who judged your every move? Could you carry not just your own weight, but the weight of your household's future? Most modern people are used to flexibility, the idea that your role can shift, change, expand, or retreat. In Viking society, your role was steady and constant. That was its strength, and also its burden. It brought order, it brought pride, but it rarely left room for doubt. In the next part, we will explore the darkness that came with the long winters, the isolation, the sickness, the struggles of the body and mind in a world without doctors, without light, and sometimes without hope. Because Viking life was not just about glory and grit. It was also about enduring the nights that seemed like they would never end. The cold was never just outside. In Viking Scandinavia, winter found its way through the cracks in the wood, under the wool blankets, and into the bones of the people trying to outlast it. It was not just a season, it was a weight. And when the days shortened and the wind howled, it tested every person in the household. Some survived by strength, others by habit. Some simply endured because there was no choice. Imagine a morning where the sun barely rises. You wake in darkness. The fire has burned low overnight. The air is bitter. Your breath fogs in front of your face, even inside the longhouse. You reach for your shoes, stiff with cold, and you slip them on quickly before your toes go numb. There is no warm bathroom waiting for you. There is no tap water to splash on your face. You reach for a basin near the fire if there is water left in it that has not frozen. The sky stays gray. Sometimes it never turns fully light. The snow has built up outside the doorway, and you must shovel your way out with a flat board or wooden scoop. The livestock need feeding. You trudge through snow up to your knees to check the shed where the animals huddle together for warmth. If one has died in the night, there is no time to mourn. You drag the body out. You cannot afford to let sickness spread to the others. Inside the house, there is work, but it moves slower. People are quieter in winter. Talking takes effort. The house is cramped. Everyone is inside. You live shoulder to shoulder with family, thralls, children, elders. There is no privacy. You step around sleeping dogs, over buckets of dried fish, past piles of salted meat hanging from beams. The smoke from the hearth fills the space. It stings your eyes. You cough into your sleeve, but you do not complain. There is no comfort in complaint. Meals are simple: porridge, bread, broth. The same food every day. The salted meat tastes strong, and the dried herbs give only a faint flavor. Fresh vegetables are gone. Fruit is a memory. You eat slowly, not because it is enjoyable, but because you want the warmth to last. The heat from the bowl is the best part. Illness spreads easily in this season. If one person starts coughing, soon others do too. There are no doctors. There are healers, usually women, who know the uses of certain roots, who mix honey with herbs, who boil bark into teas. But there are no guarantees. If the fever rises, you sit by the fire and wait. Some recover, some do not. If someone dies, the body is wrapped, taken out into the snow, and buried when the ground softens or stored in a cave until then. The days are short, the nights are long. You pass the hours weaving, sewing, repairing tools, carving, or telling stories. Sometimes there is laughter, but it is quiet. Joy feels like something to protect, not to parade. You speak in low voices. The children ask for stories of gods and monsters, and you tell them what you remember. It is not just entertainment. It is tradition. It reminds everyone that the world is bigger than these four walls. Light comes from fire, from oil lamps, from tallow candles if you are lucky. But candles are precious. Most people live by firelight, their faces flickering orange and gold as the logs burn slowly. A good fire is a treasure. A strong chimney is a blessing. But the smoke still drifts. You grow used to it. Your clothes, your hair, everything smells of wood and ash. The mind begins to drift during these months. Time blurs. One day is like the next. Without sunlight, some people grow sad, quiet, withdrawn. They sit by the fire and say little. Others grow restless, irritated, easily angered. There is no name for this feeling, but it is familiar to everyone. Some pray, some carve, some hum old songs. Anything to pass the hours and keep the mind steady. The winters are not without danger. Roofs sag under the weight of snow. Ice breaks paths and ladders. Wolves grow bold when food is scarce. A child who wanders too far from the house can vanish in a white storm and never return. Everyone watches the weather. Everyone counts the stores of food. Everyone whispers thanks when the sun finally rises a little earlier and the shadows grow shorter. But winter also brings its own kind of closeness. You spend more time with your family than in any other season. You share meals. You sleep in a row for warmth. You listen to each other breathe at night. You hear the quiet rhythm of spinning wheels, the slow click of bone needles, the shuffle of feet. It is not peaceful, but it is intimate. It binds people together in silence and necessity. If there is a celebration, it is for the turning of the year. The Yule season is not grand. It is not decorated with fine cloth or gifts. But it brings music, fire, extra food, and if there is mead, a little bit of laughter. People share what they can. They tell stories of the old gods, the long ships, the fallen warriors, and they look to the sky, hoping for clearer days. Could you survive this kind of winter? Not just the cold, but the repetition, the sameness, the weight of endless night and uncertain food, the soreness in your joints, the sting of smoke in your eyes, the fear that the cough you hear in the dark is something worse, the hunger that never quite leaves, the silence that is not empty, but full of waiting. You might try. You might wrap yourself in furs and brave the wind. You might carve a spoon by firelight or help mend a torn cloak. But you would feel the days stretch. You would feel the dark settle over your thoughts. You would wonder how long it would last. And that question, more than any other, is what everyone carries during these long months. How much longer until the light returns? In the final part, we will step back and reflect on the larger picture. What did it all mean to live in this time and place? What legacies did the Vikings leave behind? And why do their stories still matter today? After everything you have seen and endured, the question becomes not just, could you have survived, but what kind of person would you have become? You have seen the fire-lit longhouse and felt the wind carve through your skin. You have tasted their meals, touched their tools, heard their stories told in quiet corners, while snow pressed against the walls. You have learned that the Vikings were not just raiders and warriors. They were farmers, mothers, blacksmiths, fishermen, healers, weavers, dreamers, and survivors. Now the question remains, after everything, after every frozen morning and aching joint and quiet evening spent by the hearth, what does it all mean? Viking life was not romantic. It was not cinematic. It was not soaked in non-stop glory and gold. It was slow, rhythmic, and often grueling. And yet, in its own way, it was whole. The people of Viking Scandinavia lived fully in their world. They knew every inch of their land and every thread of their fabric. Their culture was built not only on conquest, but on deep personal knowledge of how to live with nature, not in spite of it. When we think of the Vikings today, we picture the ships, the raids, the roaring men with braided beards and bloodied axes. But those were moments, not lives. Real Viking life was quieter and far more complex. It was shaped by endless labor and deep ritual. It was held together by belief, family, memory, and the fierce will to keep going even when the sun vanished for weeks at a time. They worked with what they had: no electricity, no medicine, no guarantees. But they built tools that lasted, raised roofs that stood against the wind, sewed clothing warm enough to survive Arctic nights, carved boats that crossed oceans, made homes in lands no one else dared settle. Their skills were not optional. Their craft was not art for art's sake. It was survival, elevated by patience and pride. And their values: strength, loyalty, honor, memory, those were not abstract. They were practiced daily. You did not talk about bravery, you showed it. You did not whisper about responsibility. You lived it. A Viking child could recite their ancestors' names because those names mattered. A Viking warrior might die for a king, but he fought for his name, for his land, and for those who waited at home with firewood stacked and bread rising on the hearth. Yes, they raided. Yes, they fought. But that was not all they did. They traded across continents, from the shores of Newfoundland to the sands of the Middle East. They carved runes, built towns, told sagas that still stir the imagination over 1,000 years later. They buried their dead with care, built boats to send off their heroes, and honored gods who demanded not perfection, but attention. And they endured. More than anything else they endured. Storms came, crops failed, fevers spread, but they kept going. Because there was no other option. Because to be Viking was to wake up and work, to sweat and bleed, to love your land and guard your kin and do your part, however small, to keep the whole thing moving forward. Could you have done the same? Could you have pulled yourself from bed in the dark, stepped into frozen boots, and faced another day of cold meals and harder work? Could you have taken joy in small things: a dry fire, a shared song, the return of a loved one from the sea? Could you have shaped your life not around what you wanted, but what was needed? Modern life is full of comfort, convenience, and choice. The Viking world had almost none of those things, but it had clarity. It had rhythm. It had meaning shaped not by ease, but by effort. And maybe that is why their stories still hold us today. Not because we envy their hardship, but because part of us recognizes something in it. A reminder that humans are capable of more than we give ourselves credit for. That strength is not just physical. That survival can be noble. That memory, identity, and belonging are worth fighting for even when the sky is dark and the wolves are close. The Viking Age came to an end as all ages do. Christianity spread. Kings rose. Longhouses gave way to stone walls. Ships turned into churches and tools into trade. But something of the Viking spirit remained. You can still feel it in the languages they left behind, in the maps they helped draw, in the bones of settlements scattered across wind-beaten coasts. And you can feel it, too, in the stories, in the sagas whispered by firelight, in the names etched into stone, in the memory of lives lived fully, not easily, but with purpose. You have now walked through their world. You have seen why most people today would not last a day in it, but you have also seen why they did. Because they had each other. They had tradition. They had skill. They had gods and ghosts and memories and stories. And above all, they had will. The kind of will that gets up one more time than it falls. The kind that looks at a frozen field, a broken fence, an empty pot, and gets to work. So, as the final fire of this story burns low, you are left not with glory, but with something better. A quiet respect. For the people who came before us, for the lives they lived, and for the world they built, one axe swing, one woven thread, one breath at a time.